Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Valeria and this is the Off-Road Ranch. Ignorance of the law is not an excuse. With nature this rule works 100%. If you don't know how it is important to preserve the natural conditions in which life on Earth is possible and human existence is possible, how important the balance of temperature and humidity indicators is across the planet, how important biodiversity is, this doesn't mean that if the natural course of things is disrupted, you will continue to exist in a created reality called the concrete jungle. This is the most important reason why global warming today is a different global warming that was talked about decades ago. Many people are so disconnected from nature that they have never ever seen a living chicken or a bee, have no idea how products are grown or where fruits come from. However, your isolation from nature and reality doesn't mean that this connection doesn't exist and that you can survive isolated from nature, and all you have to do is hand over the cart and receive all the benefits in return. The life of a modern person is very simplified. Spend 12 hours at work, receive money, exchange money for goods and services. That's all. The direct influence of climate change doesn't affect you as you think. But interconnections of nature is billions of times more complex. That is why it is difficult to convey the consequences of climate change, especially since most people believe that 1, 2, 3, 4 degrees is not a number at all. Moreover, many people appeal to periodic historic climate change throughout the existence of planet Earth and believe that the temperature would have risen anyway. However, they do not take into account that it would have risen by 1 degree not in 10 years, but in 200 years. Further, many people cannot even look at their own lives even after a year, let alone look at their lives after 20 years, and even more so, let alone look at the world situation through 20 years. And finally, the problem is that many press releases, reports and other documents do not provide numbers. They simply say that something is higher, something is exceeding the growth rate, something is less than low level, and so on. Basically, these are eloquent epithets and appeals. No logical analysis or comparison can be made, because this requires precise measurements and statistical data related to time. No actions, just words. But even if this information was now freely available to us, nothing would change for 90% of population. It is very difficult. Why do this if you are already okay with everything and any problems doesn't concern you personally, so you can have fun all your life, and politicians will once again discuss various important matters and chat publicly without taking action. And if politicians don't do anything, why should you do anything? But politicians will not do anything. Why? Let's first look at the current global warming situation and then get back to action. Since sometimes information is given in numbers, I will talk about the facts of climate change that exist by 2024. However, these numbers are much more vague than I would like, and many statistical publications are paid, sometimes reaching up to $5,000 per article. Of course, for an ordinary person, this is a huge amount. Therefore, yes, there is data. Moreover, this data has been collected for citizens' taxes, but it is not available to ordinary person. So, the consequences of warming are far away. Consequences are something abstract, distant, and probabilistic that doesn't concern many people. Many people perceive neither the future nor the past. They consider events and statistics from 10 years ago irrelevant and outdated, and the future is very distant, unrealistic, and unpredictable. Many people do not even see their life after a year, so I thought I wouldn't talk about the consequences in the future. I will talk about the consequences of the past, about things that were once a threat 10, 20, 50 years ago, and now this future has arrived, and we live in it. I will mainly talk about facts that are already happening, but I will also touch on the future a little. each of 10 last years has been the hottest on record. The increase in average temperatures compared to the pre-industrial period since around the mid-19th century has reached 1.58 degrees Celsius, according to data for April 2024, despite the fact that the Paris Agreement was concluded in 2015, according to which participating countries promised not to allow world temperature to exceed more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. They also promised to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But in 2019, a report by the United Nations Environment Programme showed that these same participating countries plan to increase fossil fuel production until 2040. It's not that they wouldn't reduce it, or at least leave at the current level, but increase it. I would like to remind you that in parallel, they promised to reduce greenhouse emissions. However, in November 2023, they set a goal to hold the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And the science data showed that greenhouse gas emissions must decline 43% by 2030 to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But I think these numbers are impossible. Firstly, the temperature rises anyway. Secondly, we haven't seen any actions of warning about global warming for all these decades. It is very difficult to remain tactful and polite when you see such a discrepancy between words and deeds. Some scholars are calling the Paris Agreement a fraud. The reason for everything is human greed and gluttony. No one of the participants, no one of the members of organizations or governments will give up the opportunity to earn money, will voluntarily agree to become poorer and therefore weaker. But let's get back to the climate facts. So, the increase in average temperatures compared to the pre-industrial period has reached 1.58 degrees since about the middle of the 19th century. The result has been an increase in wildfires, extended heat waves, extreme snowfalls, and other destructive weather events, including hurricanes, droughts, and floods. Fires have also spread to the Arctic regions, and the number of fires in the Amazon forests has reached a record level. What is record and extreme? Unfortunately, I don't have an answer, since there are no numbers. From 1997 to 2006, sea level rose by an average of 3 millimeters annually, and from 2007 to 2016, the rate of ocean advance was already 4 millimeters per year. The reasons are the rise in seawater temperature and the melting of glaciers in Greenland and West Antarctica. I didn't find any numbers from 2016 to 2024, but I don't think these numbers have gotten any smaller. In this case, according to my assumptions, in 27 years, the sea level has risen by about 10 centimeters, and it will continue to rise. Annual volume loss from the Antarctic ice sheet increased at least sixfold from 1979 to 2017. I didn't find any more recent data, but in terms of the level of glacier melting, the last 10 years have also become a record in the entire history of observations. Once the glaciers melt and what was underneath is exposed, even more active heating of the planet's surface begins, because glaciers reflect and scatter the sun rays with their own surface. The acidity level of the world's oceans has increased by 26% since the beginning of the industrial era, that is, since the mid-19th century, when the Industrial Revolution began. What is ocean acidification? This is the absorption of carbon dioxide by water. Imagine if you were exposed to acid rain. What would be? Your clothes, body, tissues would dissolve. The acid would burn them. This is approximately what happens to the inhabitants of the ocean. The ocean is home to 98% of the planet's species, and life on Earth is entirely dependent on the ocean. Excess heat settles in the world ocean, every year for decades has been a record for the amount of heat contained in the upper layer of seawater at a depth of up to 1,000 meters. This changes ocean currents, the intensity and frequency of tides, affects both floods and droughts, all natural disasters, and they become unpredictable for scientists, since new factors and new interconnections are unknown. Statistics can be compiled if there is a repeatability of events, if there are stable factors and interconnected relationships. But when absolutely everything changes, it is impossible to draw patterns. And even more so, it is impossible to predict weather phenomena and the approach of disasters in advance. The melting of Antarctica is releasing methane from ancient waters that have been under the ice for several thousand years. Further melting of Antarctica's ice will lead to an increase in methane emissions into the atmosphere. Methane is one of the greenhouse gases, and its greenhouse activity over a 20-year period is 84 times stronger than carbon dioxide. An increase in temperature leads to the active reproduction of viruses, bacteria, and fungi, which also become more resistant. Due to shifting climate conditions, birds and insects that carry diseases migrate. This is especially true for tropical viruses such as West Nile virus, dengue fever, and others. There are no vaccines for some viruses yet. According to Nature Climate Change Research, warming affects 218 of 375 infectious diseases, or 58%. But more than that, in those places that are now glaciers and that are actively melting, there were burials of people, just like everywhere else around the world. However, bodies and viruses were preserved in the ice, and some peoples had a tradition of not burning those who died from infections, but hiding them in glaciers. With the melting of glaciers, dangerous viruses that humanity has been getting rid of for many hundreds of years will also melt. For example, smallpox, anthrax, and Spanish flu. The area of ice cover in the Arctic Ocean in winter has been declining over the past 40 years, by an average of 12% every decade, and warm flows of water that fall into cracks between glaciers intensify this process. Such a rise in the level of the world seas entails flooding of low-lying coasts of all countries and cities such as Amsterdam, London, New York, Shanghai, and many others. These are many coasts of the USA, areas of Britain and Europe, and significant parts of South and East Asia. By 2050, the number of residents of coastal cities threatened by cyclones and hurricanes will double. More than half of the cities are located in seismic zones. If you think that 2050 is a long time coming, remember that 10, 15, 20 years ago you didn't even think about 2024 because you thought it was the distant future. But 2050 is only 25 years away. Ask your parents or grandparents how quickly their 25 years passed. Remember how you went to school and how quickly the time flew by. Do not live for today. Extreme snowfalls are also a consequence of climate change. The presence of snowfall is not synonymous with the absence of warming. Unusually high levels of snowfall are also a consequence of global warming. Cold weather is not the only condition for snow to fall. Heavy snowfall requires high air humidity, which increases as the concentration of water vapor in the air increases. And water vapor is also one of the greenhouse gases. This exacerbates extreme rainfall and flooding. Warming oceans have affected the frequency and location of the most intense tropical storms. A huge number of people are displaced every year as a result of floods, storms, and drought. According to the World Meteorological Organization, the number of weather-related disasters has increased fivefold over the past 50 years. You can improve risk management systems as much as you can and invest money in them. But it is important not only to predict disasters, but also to prevent them, or rather to stop at the current level. But this is no longer accessible to humans. In many countries, for example, Iraq, Syria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, in some regions, people can no longer grow food because the previously fertile soil has dried out. Entire villages and cities, dozens of thousands of people are leaving to live and work in other places. But other cities, other places are not ready for such a number of refugees. The unemployment rate and housing shortage are growing, not to mention the shortage of food. This leads to discontent and protests, and this will continue. The United Nations Environment Programme estimates that more than 1 billion people worldwide are at high risk of exposure to extreme heat due to lack of access to cooling, the vast majority of whom live in Africa and Asia. Moreover, almost a third of the world's population is exposed to deadly heat waves more than 20 days a year. The total number of days with temperatures above 50 degrees Celsius has increased in every decade since 1980. On average, between 1980 and 2009, temperatures exceeded 50 degrees Celsius on about 14 days per year. But between 2010 and 2019, this number increased to 26 days per year. I don't know the today's figures, but what is known is that in 2023, from the 15th of August to the 8th of December, the highest air temperatures for the entire time of temperature measurements were recorded continuously for 116 days. Unfortunately, a person still considers these events separately, doesn't want to learn various information and accept that these are interconnected events, and they will become worse. And even if absolute values do not reach 50 degrees Celsius, high temperatures and humidity pose serious health risks. The body stops functioning normally when the temperature reaches 41 degrees Celsius, and high humidity causes great damage. As air quality drops, the lungs work harder. Dehydration causes kidney problems, and 80% of the population is already dehydrated. The brain may begin to swell and lack oxygen, increasing the risk of heat stroke. The heart rate increases to transfer heat from vital organs to the skin. Sweating may stop, and the skin becomes pale, cold, and dry. High air temperatures increase the amount of dangerous gases in the lower atmosphere, such as ozone, which leads to worsening cardiovascular and respiratory diseases. During extreme heat, levels of aeroallergens such as pollen increase. They can trigger asthma, which currently affects approximately 300 million people. If even this doesn't inspire you, heat waves kill dozens of thousands of people every year. And this is not an understatement. I do not include death from food shortages here, because then it would be not dozens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands, and even millions. I'm talking specifically about the heat at the moment. And if you think that this is happening somewhere far away in distant countries of Africa or Asia, which have always been hot, and which do not concern you, and you don't care about these people, then I will come to your house. People are dying from heat waves all over the world, in all countries of Central and Eastern Europe, and sometimes Northern, especially in Spain, Great Britain, Germany, Italy, France, Bulgaria, Romania. People die from abnormal heat in Canada, the USA, many countries in South America, Peru, Brazil, Chile, most Asian countries, many African countries, and Japan. Less than 3 years ago, an article was published with the conclusion of a large-scale study on the effect of high temperatures on mortality rates from all causes in different regions of the world. 70 climatologists and epidemiologists from 43 countries concluded that human-caused global warming is responsible for 37% of total heat-related deaths. And in some countries, like Ecuador and Colombia, this share is more than 75%. According to the World Health Organization, from 1998 to 2017, more than 160,000 people died from heat all over the world. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of people who could have survived if not for increasing climate change. Other studies provide even more impressive numbers. For example, The Lancet report states that during approximately the same period, extreme heat claimed about 300,000 lives in the older age group, over 65 years. If we take into account all the temperature disasters caused by climate change, then according to some estimates, more than 5 million people become their victims every year. The real statistics were even hidden before, but now, with the worsening situation, it is simply impossible to find the numbers. And I will give you an example why. In the summer of 2003, that is already 20 years ago, 30,000 people died from extreme heat in Europe. And only 5 years later, it became known that the real figure was 70,000 dead. But in fact, perhaps more. This was one of the reasons why all other events have been hidden. And the most important consequences. Now the temperature rise will continue even with a complete stop of human activities. And all the phenomena and natural processes are listed above will intensify. The waste of human activity will affect nature for hundreds of years to come and lead to even greater destruction and death. Even if the world were to immediately and sharply reduce emissions, some processes are irreversible for centuries, if not millennia, most notably temperatures, sea levels, and ice cover. If you want to know why that happens, write in the comments, and I will tell you in one of the videos what greenhouse gases are and what activities cause them. I hope that you are already making your minimum contribution, which for you is common sense and the norm. And this is garbage separation, turning off the lights, saving water, buying only the food you need and preferably simple, minimally processed, careful attitude toward things so as not to buy them several times, but to save and maintain them, buying quality things a stingy person pays twice and a stupid person pays constantly. But in any case, you will have to answer on a much larger scale. Self-education and self-development. Of course, this is not enough. These actions are a molecule in the universe. You must become actively involved in solving the problem of global warming. Now, let's get back to why politicians and public figures, representatives of organizations and company owners, will not do anything to significantly reduce emissions. The answer is simple. You are either a shark in business, a person with resources and power, or you are a useless creature who takes someone else's place. And it is not about money. They have a lot of money. The fact is that this person is no longer needed, and another person will take his place. For some, such a person will be a weak link. For others, a traitor. So other people will receive his resources and company. And money can be printed or simply drawn on a digital bank account. After all, it is not money that feeds humanity. Can anyone tell me how to get billionaires to give up mining and become targets and prey rather than predators? And even the notorious Greta Thunberg, as it turned out, simply shouted from the stage for several years, made some politicians cry, slightly raised discontent in society, and even pretended she was ready to take decisive actions by refusing to fly on airplanes. But basically, she earned a lot, and most importantly, she became an excellent political tool for someone in the struggle for power. Do you know why it all ended there? Because 99% of people are waiting for decisions from someone else. No, not even that. 99% of people are waiting for events to turn them into their own circus and endless gossip. After all, a person really wants to feel like he's a part of an important event. He wants to feel important. He wants to express opinion. But all these desires end in stupid chatter, because anyone can talk. And the remaining 1% will just think for a very long time about doing something. And only 0.01% will do. And always, in all major events, hypocritical experts and businessmen appear to ride on someone else's grief, on innovative solutions and working strategies. Enormous self-confidence and walking over other people's head have led many people to big money and power. If you don't want to be walked over your head, you shouldn't wait for events to arise that you will discuss with everyone you meet. You should solve problems yourself. For this, you need to constantly learn and determine steps for action, and constantly ensure your security, including information security. About 75% of all anthropogenic carbon dioxide emissions over the past 25 years resulted from the extraction and combustion of oil, natural gas, and coal. Most of the remaining CO2 emissions are caused by changes in the landscape, primarily deforestation. About a quarter of all greenhouse gases come from agricultural activities. And all this is the result of human activity. No, not the whole humanity. 99% of this is the result of the activities of the richest 1% of people in the world, who own the largest companies in every sector of the economy. These people have a constant race for power and resources, who for some reason decided that appropriating the resources of the earth and monopolizing all sectors of the economy is normal. None of these people will refuse to stop extracting fossil resources, processing them, burning them. No one will refuse to reduce their influence, reduce their profits and power. Everyone is interested in becoming the best, getting the most resources, lands, valuable deposits, precious metals, people in the territories, and of course, money. All these corporations and companies extract more and more every year, produce more and more products and goods, expand and reduce the cost of production, even if no one needs it. Production growth shouldn't be a key indicator of human development. The very concept of GDP is constructed incorrectly. Who said that constant growth and expansion of the economy is good? At the moment, there is no correlation or connection at all in almost every country in the world between extracted resources and produced goods, the country's GDP and the state of the economy, real income of an individual, and the cost of living. With the rational distribution of resources, with adequate consumption, using alternative methods of producing electricity and heat, mining and production of goods can be reduced significantly, while providing the entire population with basic goods. Of course, every person must understand that no one should organize or bring anything to him. Each person must invest himself in the activities of humanity. Otherwise, as always, any decisions and consequences will be criticized by 90% of the population who have never ever gotten off the couch to do something themselves. Constantly increasing mining and commodity production increase greenhouse gas emissions. It is impossible to produce more and at the same time produce less. Marketing and engineering come up with new ways to increase consumption, regardless of the real needs of the population and financial status. Product quality is constantly being reduced in order to cut costs. The quality of goods is artificially limited for the rapid decommissioning of equipment and constant purchases by the consumer. The social gap in the population is widening, and people are flocking to large cities to survive. Cities use most of the world's energy resources, and metropolitan areas make a big contribution to increasing the Earth's temperature. On average, temperatures are always high in cities because they rely on fossil fuels for lighting, heating, and cooling. But you cannot just stop urban sprawl. Some politicians are trying to do this, but the consequences of such containment are satellite cities, huge commuter passenger traffic, and the emergence of illegal buildings outside the city. That is, the city is unofficially growing into a single huge zone instead of stopping its growth. Such examples are the Chinese megalopolis of the Pearl River Delta, with a population of over 71 million inhabitants, the Chinese megalopolis of the Yangtze Delta, with a population of over 64 million inhabitants, the Japanese megalopolis of Tokaido, with a population of about 62 million inhabitants, the American Northeast megalopolis Boswash, with a population of over 43 million inhabitants, and others. The problem initially is that large cities are an opportunity to make money, but outside the city there are hundreds of times fewer such opportunities. Each person survives as best he can to feed himself. And the root cause here is the economic structure, where a person cannot earn money anywhere in the world, and he is forced to give his life for survival. Transport accounts for a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions and a fifth of the world's energy use. But the solution is not a refusal of transport. It is a change in infrastructure in such a way that a person has the opportunity to move to the right points using public transport, and it is comfortable. And also so that a person is not lazy to walk a couple of kilometers. However, the maximum rejection of personal transport means a lack of demand for cars, which means that the owners of many automobile companies and corporations will simply lose their business, and with it, their reputation, power, and resources. In addition, this is a refusal of transport fuel, which is also disadvantageous for owners of resource-extracting fields. Nobody will refuse money. And besides this, the electricity for charging electric vehicles also comes from burning fossil resources. And the batteries in these cars are much more damaging and poisonous to the planet than the metal body of an old car, which will lie in the ground as a piece of metal for hundreds of years and not burn flora and fauna with acid. Moreover, along with the long-term struggle for climate change, China has almost taken first place in car production. Somehow, China is not very concerned about global warming. And let's not create illusions that it will suddenly change their mind and stop. It doesn't care about the rest of the world, like many other countries. The Emirates announced the construction of the world's largest airport by 2050. It is planned that by 2030, the capacity will be 130 million passengers per year. Now, it is approximately 90 million passengers. We don't know the ecological footprint of this activity. For many decades, corporations haven't restored and are not restoring mineral extraction sites, didn't monitor the correct disposal of waste, and didn't reduce emissions. Why? Because paying a tax or a fine is hundreds of times cheaper than developing an effective system for maintaining the territory after an activity. Assessing the damage, calculating the necessary resources for restoration, organizing a restoration system, monitoring this place for decades. It is just laziness. I already said above that about 20% of CO2 emissions are caused by deforestation, since forests process carbon dioxide and purify the air from it, not to mention the fact that they are home to 80% of animals. Illegal logging accounts for about 20% of the total timber volume. So during the United Nations Climate Change Conference in 2021, more than 100 government leaders committed to stopping deforestation by 2030 as part of the fight against global warming. Dear viewer, do you believe this? Between 2019 and 2023, Amazon forests were deforested 5 times more than earlier. The Amazon forests are being cut down not just for timber and not just for agricultural expansion and livestock farming, but also for mineral extraction, such as gold, including illegal mining. There is an opinion that sometimes it might happen with government involvement. However, after the election of a new president in Brazil, deforestation in the Amazon has decreased by 50%, and the new government promises to stop deforestation by 2030. However, some scientists say that the Amazon has already ceased to function as a carbon sink. I also want to touch on the impact of warfare and maintenance of military equipment on rising temperatures. The global military-industrial complex is responsible for 2% of CO2 emissions into the atmosphere. But there is more than just hydrocarbons. Military equipment requires metals, including rare ones for increasingly complex electronics, the production of high-quality steel, which is very energy-intensive, and various plastics. Besides this, the equipment requires a lot of fuel, even just for movement. Destruction of soil by heavy military equipment, destruction of all living things by bombs and flamethrower systems, pollution of land, water and air with heavy metals and toxins, testing of nuclear weapons and releases of radioactive gases, destruction of forests and fauna by chemicals, the use of military sonars that damage and destroy marine life, and so on. Infrastructure and industrial facilities are destroyed. Sometimes entire cities are wiped off the face of the earth, and regions fall into desolation. Agriculture is suffering. The death of animals on large farms and industries, the rotting and decomposition of thousands of crops can lead to a real environmental and epidemiological disaster, especially in hot climates. Animals and birds are forced to change their traditional habitats and migration routes. Some species, especially endemic ones, can be completely destroyed. All of this leads to further emissions, including toxic substances and disruption of the production balance and water and energy balance use. As a result, all of this leads to local and global environmental disasters. I will again touch upon the United Nations Climate Change Conference COP26 in Glasgow, where the NATO Secretary General was present. The issue of reducing greenhouse gas emissions associated with military vehicles was raised there. But there was no talk about stopping wars. Instead, there was a talk about possible security threats posed by climate risks and the need for army to prepare for global warming. What are the reasons for this? The first is access to fossil resources that were under the ice and became available and coveted by many powerful people. Second, the military believes it will be necessary to use military force in response to extreme climate events. What does this response mean? Is this response to a food crisis, energy shortage, deteriorating hygiene, an increase in diseases, deteriorating infrastructure, and as a result, people's protests? I don't know. Think about it. Every enterprise, be it a resource mining company, an international corporation, or a small business in a small town, every city, be it a city with a population of 15,000 people or a megapolis of dozens of millions of inhabitants, all of them count their indicators, their income and expenses, their purchases and taxes, their cost and products produced. Therefore, absolutely all the largest companies in the world know how much of what they purchased, how much raw materials they extracted, and how many products they produced. Also, all governments carry out statistical policies and planning. This means they also know about the amount of waste and greenhouse gases produced as a result of their activities. The concepts of trade secrets, state secrets, confidential security information are a very convenient tool for non-disclosure of such data. Another very convenient mechanism for hiding information is suitcases of money or threats that will silence any statistics collector. As a result, instead of specific statistics, at least official statistics, not taking into account illegal mining, illegal deforestation, theft at enterprises, and so on, in the end, instead of a list of companies that cause the greatest damage to the planet, instead of specific culprits, we have vague formulations and are so tired of everyone's calls. Politicians and representatives of organizations are so afraid of that small percentage of society that cares of the future of the planet and the future of man. They are so afraid of that small percentage of people who, instead of TikTok, Twitter and Instagram, will sit down and study what is happening, who will look around, who will ask their friends from other countries real news, who will look for connections and find critical problems. They are so afraid that a tired, poor, downtrodden society without freedom of speech and freedom of action open its mouth, that all the data in open sources, on the internet, in the news, in publications, is just a set of complex sentences several hundred words long, and they have no meaning, no logic, and no historical interconnections. Moreover, they are composed in such a way that a person will forget what he was reading in the beginning of the sentence until he reads it till the end. If you want me to record a video with the solutions to all these problems, then I need 200,000 people to watch this video from the beginning till the end and write in the comments at least one problem that you have ever thought about and its solution. What is the conclusion from this? The elite don't care that they are the cause of global warming. No one will consciously reduce emissions and commit business suicide of their own free will. The desires of these figures contradict common sense. Do they care about global warming? Yes, but only for them personally. We are an empty place, and 90% of the population is not needed to ensure their livelihoods, and they care about that only. And if you are not motivated by the prospect of the environmental catastrophe, perhaps you will be motivated by the fact that the way to stop warming will be you, not stopping their economic activity. Because if you don't exist, there is no need to extract resources and produce goods. And there is no need to change economic strategies. Think about providing for people, redistribute the areas of the economies, and so on. No person, no problem. And no matter how much you blame politicians and governments, no matter how much you close your eyes and explain that what is happening is just a random combination of factors, no matter how much you blame the previous generation, which put up with the current situation and brought you to the state. From the moment you turned 18 or 21 in some countries, you take part in what is happening. And from now on, today's situation is our problem, and responsibility for consequences lies with us. And every individual person, yes, you, my viewer, must turn on the hat and understand that lack of action, inaction, also has consequences, and sometimes greater than actions. And each of us must understand that we already live in a world that is catastrophically changing and deteriorating. And you cannot escape this problem. You will have to either give up or learn to live in new conditions and take actions. We live in a time when products made even 100 years ago are still decomposing and producing carbon dioxide. And all the products that are being produced now will decompose for the next 100, 200, 500 years. And the environmental situation, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, will deteriorate significantly in a few years, regardless of any potentially innovative implementations. We can no longer run away from what we have been achieving for 200 years. Whether you will be able to continue to exist in new conditions depends on you. Perhaps something still can be changed. It was Valeria, the Off-Road Ranch. I wish you all the best and see you soon.